The galaxy's ancient species declines to visit Earth. WHY. Ambassador sat in her office on the 47th floor of the United Earth Embassy building in Geneva. The morning sun came through the large windows and made patterns on her desk. She held a cup of coffee in her hands, but she had forgotten to drink it. Her eyes were fixed on the holographic screen floating in front of her. 17 years had passed since the day everything changed. 17 years since humanity discovered they were not alone in the universe. A trading ship had appeared in Earth's orbit, and nothing had been the same after that. At first, there was fear, then wonder, then the long, difficult work of joining a galaxy full of intelligent species. Had given her life to this work. She had missed her daughter's graduation. She had missed her father's funeral. She had spent countless nights in meeting rooms, learning alien languages, understanding alien customs, and slowly building trust between Earth and the stars. Now, her greatest achievement was almost complete. The Millennial Summit would be held on Earth. Every major species in the Galactic Concord had agreed to send their representatives. It would be the first time in history that Earth hosted such an important event. Humanity would finally be seen as equals among the stars. They had confirmed their attendance 3 months ago. Their crystalline bodies would fill the concert halls with sounds that human ears could barely hear, but human hearts could feel deeply. They had spent weeks debating which of their hive minds would make the journey, a sign of how seriously they took the invitation. Even the who rarely left their deep space monasteries had agreed to come. Then this morning, the final response had arrived. Read the message again for the 10th time. The words were polite, the language was formal, but the meaning was clear. The ETH would not be attending. She put down her coffee cup and pressed her fingers against her eyes. In 17 years of diplomatic work, she had learned many things about the galaxy. She had learned that the valued efficiency above all else. She had learned that the experienced music the way humans experienced love. She had learned that the believed silence was the highest form of wisdom. And she had learned about the ETH. The ETH were old, not old like a mountain or an ocean, old like the stars themselves. Their civilization had existed for 4 billion years. They had watched the first complex life forms crawl out of ancient seas on 1,000 different worlds. They had seen empires rise and fall like waves on a beach. They had witnessed the birth and death of countless species. Other civilizations measured their own history against ETH records. When they wanted to know about their own ancient past, they asked the ETH. When they wanted to understand how their species had evolved, they consulted ETH archives. The ETH were the living memory of the entire galaxy. And in 4 billion years of recorded history, the ETH had never refused an invitation to a significant event. Never, not once. His office door opened, and her entered. Elle was a member of the 7th cluster, their body a collection of smaller forms that moved together as one being. Their many eyes looked at with concern. "You have read the message," Elle said. "It was not a question." "I have read it many times," replied. "I cannot understand it." Nor can anyone in the Concord. The diplomatic channels are filled with confusion. The High Harmony has requested an emergency session. They have broken their vow of silence to ask questions. Stood up and walked to the window. Below her, the city of Geneva continued its daily routine. People walked on streets, cars moved through traffic, and life went on. None of them knew that something impossible had just happened. "What did we do wrong?" she asked. "Did we offend them somehow? Did we break some custom we didn't know about?" Elle's many forms shifted uncomfortably. Had learned to read body language over the years. This was not simple discomfort. This was fear. "Ambassador, I do not believe you understand the situation." Turn to face her, then help me understand. The ETH do not refuse invitations because they are offended. The ETH do not refuse invitations because they are busy. The ETH do not refuse invitations for any normal reason. Elle paused, their compound eyes reflecting the sunlight. In 4 billion years, the Eth have seen everything. They have experienced everything. Nothing surprises them. Nothing interests them enough to avoid it. So why would they refuse now? That is the question that terrifies every species in the conquered ambassador. The Eth are not staying away because they look down on humanity. The Eth are not staying away because Earth is unimportant. El moved closer, their voice dropping to something that sounded almost like a whisper. The question is not what humanity has done wrong. The question is what the Eth are afraid of. Felt a chill run down her spine. The Eth were afraid. The oldest species in the galaxy, the ones who had witnessed the birth and death of stars, the ones who had seen civilizations destroy themselves 1,000,000 times over, they were afraid. Of Earth, of humanity. I need to speak with them, said. Someone needs to go to them and find out what this means. That would require a journey of 14 months to reach there, and the Eth have not forbidden such a visit. They have simply expressed bemusement that anyone would bother making the trip. Walked back to her desk and sat down heavily in her chair. The coffee was completely cold now, and she pushed it aside. Her mind was racing with questions she could not answer. For 17 years, humanity had worked to prove themselves worthy of joining the galactic community. They had learned new technologies. They had adapted to new ways of thinking. They had shown that despite their violent history, they could be peaceful, curious, and cooperative. And now, at the moment of their greatest triumph, the oldest in species in the galaxy wanted nothing to do with them. Looked at the holographic message one more time. The polite words seemed to hide something deeper, something she could not yet see. Prepare a mission, she said finally. We need answers. Whatever the Eth are afraid of, we need to know. The future of humanity's place in this galaxy might depend on it. El nodded, their many forms moving in agreement. I will make the arrangements, but Ambassador, prepare yourself. What you learn may change how humanity sees itself forever. Nodded slowly. She had spent 17 years building bridges between Earth and the stars. Now she needed to understand why the oldest bridge builders in the universe wanted nothing to do with her world. The answer, she knew, would change everything. The galaxy's ancient species declines to visit Earth, HFY. The journey took 14 months. Commander had counted every day. Her ship, the Persistence, was one of Earth's finest exploration vessels. It carried a crew of 42 humans and 6 alien advisors from different species. They had crossed distances that would have seemed impossible just 20 years ago. They had passed dying stars and newborn nebulas. They had seen wonders that made even the most experienced crew members weep with amazement. Now finally they had arrived. The Eth hung in space before them like a dying ember. Its sun was a red giant, swollen and old beyond measure. The planet itself was covered in ancient structures that seemed to grow from the surface like metal forests. Some of those buildings had stood for longer than Earth's sun had existed. Stood on the bridge and looked at the. She was 43 years old, with short black hair and eyes that had seen much in her years of service, but nothing had prepared her for this. They are hailing us, her communications officer reported. They say we are welcome to land. Nodded, take us down. The landing was smooth. The Eth had provided exact coordinates for a platform near what they called the Archive of All Things. Chose a small team to accompany her. Her chief science officer, her cultural liaison, and 2 security officers who had been told to keep their weapons hidden. The air outside was thin but breathable. The sky was a deep red color from the old sun. Everything felt ancient, as if time itself moved more slowly here. A figure waited for them at the edge of the platform. Had seen images of the Eth before, but those images had not captured the truth. The being before her was roughly humanoid in shape, but her skin seemed to contain entire galaxies. Stars and nebulas swirled beneath her surface, as if her body was a window into deep space. Her eyes were the hardest part to look at. They held depths that made mind hurt if she stared too long. I am called She Who Remembers the Third Spiral, the Eth said. Her voice was gentle like wind through chimes. You have traveled far, young ones. Bowed respectfully. Thank you for receiving us. I am Commander of Earth. I know who you are. I watched you leave your world. I watched your journey across the void. I have watched your species since before you had a name for yourselves. The eldest tilted her head and galaxies shifted within her. You wish to know why we will not visit your world. It was not a question but answered anyway. Yes, we wish to understand if we have given offense in some way. You have given no offense, young one. The eldest laughed, and the sound was beautiful and strange at the same time. You have given us something far more troubling. You have given us recognition. Did not understand, but she stayed silent. She had learned that sometimes the best way to get answers was to wait for them. Come, the eldest said. I will show you why your species frightens us. She led them through corridors that seemed to go on forever. The walls were covered in symbols and images, each one representing some piece of history that could not begin to understand. Her science officer tried to record everything, but there was simply too much. These archives contain the history of this galaxy, the eldest explained as they walked. Every species that has ever achieved intelligence, every civilization that has risen and fallen, every war, every peace, every discovery, every failure. 4 billion years of memory stored in these halls. They passed holographic displays that flickered to life as they approached, saw creatures she had never imagined. She saw cities made of light and empires that spanned entire star systems. She saw species evolving over millions of years and others destroying themselves in moments. We have watched the cosmos for 4 billion years, the eldest continued. We have seen everything. We have every pattern, every cycle, every possible variation of intelligent life. She stopped walking and turned to face directly. Those impossible eyes seemed to look straight through her. When a species develops intelligence, it follows certain paths. There are variations, of course, but the patterns are always recognizable. We can predict, within a small margin of error, how any species will develop, how quickly they will advance, what challenges they will face, how they will respond to those challenges, whether they will survive or destroy themselves. You can predict the future, asked. We can predict the likely outcomes of any given situation based on patterns we have observed billions of times before. To us, the universe is not mysterious. It is predictable. It follows rules that we have long since understood. The eldest began walking again and the group followed. They entered a large chamber filled with a single display. The hologram showed a planet, blue oceans, green land, white clouds. Earth. We discovered your world during a routine survey, the eldest said. 12,000 of your years ago. You were a primitive species, just beginning to develop agriculture. We observed you and made our predictions. The hologram changed to show early human settlements. People working in fields, building simple structures, living their short lives. We expected to observe your rise and eventual extinction within standard parameters. 50,000 years, perhaps. 100,000 at most. You would develop, reach a plateau, and eventually decline like countless species before you. The images began to move faster, civilizations growing, cities rising. Within 2,000 years, you had exceeded our projections for cultural development. Within 5,000, you had reached technological thresholds we had not anticipated for another 40,000 years. The eldest's voice had changed. There was something in it that had not expected, something that sounded almost like wonder. We began to monitor more closely. We watched you with growing interest as you continued to defy every prediction we made. She paused. Interest became concern. Concern became something we had not felt in a very long time. What was that? Asked quietly. The eldest turned to look at her, and in those galaxy-filled eyes, saw something she had never expected to see in an immortal being. Uncertainty. We felt confusion, Commander. For the first time in billions of years, we encountered something we could not understand. The eldest gestured at the hologram of Earth. Your species is not simply unusual. Your species is impossible, and that impossibility frightens us more than anything we have witnessed in 4 billion years of watching the stars. Stood in silence, staring at the image of her home world. She had come seeking answers, but she was beginning to realize that the answers would only lead to more questions. Questions about what humanity truly was, and what they might become. The galaxy's ancient species declines to visit Earth, HFY. The hologram of Earth floated in the center of the ancient chamber, slowly rotating. Could see the continents she knew so well, the shapes that children learned to draw in school, the lands where her ancestors had lived and died for countless generations. She had never expected to see her home world through the eyes of beings who had watched it for 12,000 years. "Show me," she said to the eldest. "Show me what you mean when you say we are impossible." The eldest nodded slowly. The hologram changed, and new images appeared around them. Dates and numbers and charts filled the air, written in symbols that translators struggled to convert. Your species developed nuclear weapons in the year 1945 by your calendar, the eldest began. This is not unusual. Many species develop such weapons as they advance. What is unusual is what happened next. The hologram showed the familiar mushroom cloud rising over a ruined city. Felt her stomach tighten. She knew this history well. By every model we have developed over 4 billion years of observation, a species that creates nuclear weapons will destroy itself within 10 years. The weapons are too powerful. The species is not wise enough to control them. This pattern has repeated itself across millions of worlds. It is as reliable as the laws of physics. The eldest paused, and the hologram shifted to show the Cold War. Missiles pointed at cities, submarines lurking in dark waters, the whole world holding its breath. You did not destroy yourselves. You came close many times, but you survived. Our predictions failed. Said nothing. She remembered the stories her grandmother had told her about growing up during those years, the fear that had filled every heart. We adjusted our models, the eldest continued. Perhaps humanity was simply lucky, we thought. Perhaps the destruction was merely delayed. We continued to watch. The hologram changed again. Now it showed the Apollo program, rockets rising from launch pads, astronauts in white suits, the gray surface of the moon. In 1969, you sent members of your species to your moon. You did this using technology that should not have been capable of such a journey. By our calculations, this achievement should have been impossible for another 300 years. Felt a strange pride growing in her chest. She had heard these stories all her life, but hearing them from a being 4 billion years old gave them new meaning. You achieved this in 24 years of focused effort, the eldest said. 24 years. Do you understand what that means? Species that have existed for millions of years have not accomplished what your species did in less than 3 decades. The images continued to flow around them. The development of computers, the internet, medical advances, space stations, robotic explorers sent to distant planets. Every prediction we made, every model we created, you broke. We increased our observation. We devoted more resources to studying your world than we had given to any species in 1 billion years. The eldest stopped, and for a long moment the chamber was silent. The hologram faded, and only the soft red light from the ancient sun remained. We have seen 10 million species develop intelligence, she said finally. We have watched 100,000 achieve. We have observed every possible combination of success and failure, peace and war, creativity and destruction. She turned to face, and in her galaxy-filled eyes there was something that looked almost like reverence. We have never, not once in 4 billion years, been unable to predict what a species would do next, until humanity. Process this slowly. Her mind struggled to understand what she was hearing. The Eth, the oldest in beings in the galaxy, were unable to understand her species. "You are afraid of us because you cannot predict us?" she asked. "We are afraid," the eldest corrected gently, "because we do not understand why we cannot predict you, and we always understand. That is what we are. We are the ones who understand." She gestured, and new records appeared around them. These were different from before. They showed individual humans caught in moments of creation and discovery. A scientist in your 19th century dreamed the molecular structure of a chemical compound. He was sleeping, and the answer came to him in a dream. By every law of logic, this should be impossible. Dreams are random. They do not solve scientific problems. Yet his dream was correct. The image changed to show a battlefield. Soldiers in ancient armor faced each other across a bloody field. A military commander chose mercy when every tactical calculation demanded massacre. His army was weaker. His position was desperate. Victory required ruthlessness. Yet he chose compassion, and somehow, impossibly, this led to a greater victory than destruction ever could have. More images followed. Artists creating beauty from suffering. Scientists solving problems by ignoring the rules. Ordinary people making choices that all logic and somehow achieving extraordinary results. "Your species operates on what you call intuition," the eldest said. "You make connections that do not exist. You leap to conclusions that are not supported by evidence. You ignore logic, dismiss probability, and refuse to accept limitations." She paused, and her voice grew softer. "And somehow, impossibly, you are often correct. You are creative in a way that defies causality itself. You imagine things that cannot be, and then you make them real." Thought about this. What the eldest was describing was simply being human. It was how her species had always been. She had never considered it unusual. "That is just how we are," she said. "That is how we think. It is how we have always been." "Yes," the eldest replied, "and we have never encountered anything like it. In 4 billion years, across trillions of sentient beings, humanity is unique. You are the only species that genuinely surprises us." The words hung in the air like a judgment, or perhaps like a blessing, could not tell which. "You said you were frightened," she said carefully. "You said you were afraid of humanity, but is surprise really so terrible?" The eldest looked at her for a long moment. The galaxies in her skin swirled slowly, stars being born and dying in the depths of her ancient form. "For beings who have known everything for 4 billion years," she said quietly, "surprise is the most terrifying thing in the universe." And in that moment began to understand. The Eth had lived so long that they had forgotten what it meant to not know something. They had forgotten what it felt like to wonder. They had forgotten the fear and the joy of facing the unknown. And humanity had reminded them. "There is more," the eldest said, "more that you need to understand about why we avoid your world. Come, the final truth awaits. The galaxy's ancient species declines to visit Earth, HFY." The eldest led and her team deeper into the archives. The corridors grew older as they walked, the walls covered in symbols that predated most stars in the galaxy. The air itself seemed heavy with time. They entered a chamber that was different from the others. It was smaller, more private. The holographic displays here showed not distant species or ancient history, but something else entirely, records of the Eth themselves. "What you are about to learn," the eldest said, "has never been shared with a younger species. We are breaking a tradition that has lasted 3 billion years." Nodded solemnly. She understood the weight of what was being offered. "When we were young," the eldest began, "we were not so different from your species. We wondered about the universe. We dreamed of the stars. We created art and music and stories. We loved and feared and hoped." The holograms showed ancient Eth, their forms slightly different from the eldest's current appearance. They moved with energy and passion. They built and explored and questioned. As we grew older, we learned more. We developed technologies beyond your current understanding. We spread across the galaxy. We met other species and watched them rise and fall. And slowly, over billions of years, we began to see the patterns. The images changed. The Eth became calmer, more distant. Their movements slowed. Their expressions became neutral. The more we understood, the less we wondered. The more we knew, the less we dreamed. Eventually, we realized that we could predict everything. Every outcome, every choice, every possibility. We had seen it all before. The eldest's voice carried a sadness that had not expected. Despite her alien form and impossible age, she sounded almost human in her grief. We stopped being surprised. We stopped being curious. We stopped creating new things because we knew that everything had already been created. We became observers, witnesses to a universe that held no more mysteries for us. Felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. She was beginning to understand the true nature of the Eth's fear. "You lost something," she said quietly, "something important." "We lost everything that made existence meaningful," the eldest replied. "But we did not notice until it was gone. How can you miss something when you cannot remember what it felt like to have it?" She turned to face directly. The galaxies in her skin seemed dimmer now, as if reflecting her mood. "And then we found humanity." The hologram changed again. Now it showed Eth observers watching Earth, their expressions changing in subtle ways that was learning to read. "At first, we were simply puzzled by your unpredictability. We studied you, trying to understand the patterns we were missing. But as we watched, something strange began to happen to our observers." The images showed Eth, who had spent extended time studying humanity. They were different from the others. Their movements were more animated. Their expressions showed emotion. "They began to change," the eldest said. "They started asking questions again. They started wondering. They started creating new art, new music, new ideas, things we had not seen in a billion years." His eyes widened. "Creativity is contagious," she said. "Yes, that is the word your species uses. Contagious, like a disease that spreads from one being to another." The eldest's voice grew more serious. "Your species has a quality, we call it inspiration, that seems to infect others. Species that spend extended time with humans begin to develop unpredictable traits. They begin to innovate beyond their parameters. They begin to surprise us too." Now understood why the Eth had refused to visit Earth. It was not hatred or contempt. It was not even simple fear. It was something more complex. "You are afraid of catching our creativity," she said. "We are afraid of what it would do to us," the eldest replied. "For 3 billion years we have been stable. We have been certain. We have known our place in the universe and the universe's nature. If we were to change, if we were to become unpredictable like you, we would no longer be ourselves." She paused, and something flickered in her ancient eyes. "And yet, part of us wonders if that change might be exactly what we need." Stood in silence, processing everything she had learned. The Eth were not truly afraid of humanity. They were afraid of themselves. They were afraid of remembering what they had lost. They were afraid of feeling alive again. "If I may speak freely," said carefully, "it sounds like you are not afraid of change. You are afraid of hope." The eldest did not respond at first. The chamber was quiet except for the soft hum of ancient machinery. "Hope," she said finally, "is perhaps the most dangerous thing of all. For billions of years we have not hoped. We have simply known. Hope requires uncertainty. Hope requires the possibility of failure. Hope requires believing in things that might never happen." She looked at with those galaxy-filled eyes. "Your species is built on hope. You hope when logic says you should despair. You dream when evidence says you should surrender. You reach for the impossible and somehow, against all probability, you grasp it." Thought about her own life, her own hopes and dreams. the countless times she had faced impossible odds and refused to give up. "That is what it means to be human," she said. "And that is what we lost so long ago," the eldest replied. "The question that haunts us now is simple: do we want it back?" She gestured, and the hologram changed one final time. It showed the Eth and far in the distance the blue dot of Earth. "You came here seeking to understand why we refused your invitation. Now you know the truth. We are not avoiding Earth because we look down on humanity. We are avoiding Earth because you represent something we have not faced in 3 billion years." "What is that?" asked. The eldest's form seemed to shimmer, galaxies swirling with new energy. "A choice. For the first time in 3 billion years we must choose. We can remain as we are, eternal, unchanging, and forever certain. Or we can take the risk of encountering your species and becoming something new, something uncertain, something alive." Understood now that she had not come to the Eth simply to ask a question. She had come to deliver a message, whether she knew it or not. Humanity's very existence was a challenge to every ancient certainty in the galaxy. "What will you choose?" she asked. The eldest was silent for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice carried something that had not heard before, something that sounded almost like wonder. "I do not know," she said, "and that uncertainty is the first gift your species has given me in a very long time. The galaxy's ancient species declines to visit Earth, HFY. Commander's ship returned to Earth 6 months after leaving the Eth. The journey had felt shorter this time, filled with long hours of discussion among her crew about everything they had learned. Ambassador was waiting at the landing platform when the Persistence touched down. Her face showed the stress of months spent managing a diplomatic crisis that no one fully understood. Behind her stood representatives from a dozen species, all eager to hear what the expedition had discovered. Walked down the ramp with her full report prepared. She spent 3 hours explaining everything the eldest had told her: the ancient archives, the failed predictions, the strange effect that humanity had on other species. When she finished, the room was silent. The Galactic Concord fell into chaos over the following weeks. The revelation that humanity's greatest qualities, their creativity, their unpredictability, their stubborn refusal to accept limitations, were viewed with terror by the galaxy's oldest species, sparked debates that would continue for decades. Some species found the news concerning. If the Eth feared humanity, perhaps that fear was justified. Perhaps humans were dangerous in ways that no one had understood before. Others found it inspiring. If humanity could challenge the certainties of beings who had watched the universe for 4 billion years, perhaps that meant anything was possible. Spent her days in endless meetings, trying to explain what it all meant. She was exhausted, but she refused to rest. Too much depended on getting this right. Then, on a quiet morning 6 months after his return, everything changed again. A Eth ship appeared in Earth's orbit. Received the news while she was eating breakfast in her apartment. She nearly choked on her coffee. In 17 years of studying the Eth, she had never heard of them making an unannounced visit to any world. She rushed to the landing site, a field outside Geneva that had been prepared for the Millennial Summit. News crews were already gathering, their cameras pointed at the sky. People around the world stopped what they were doing to watch. The Eth vessel descended slowly, its design ancient and elegant. It touched down with barely a sound, and a door opened in its side. A single figure emerged. Recognized her immediately from descriptions. She who remembers the third spiral, the eldest, a being older than Earth's sun, with galaxies swirling beneath her skin and eyes that held the depths of forever. The eldest walked across the field toward the gathered humans. Every step she took seemed to carry the weight of 1 billion years. When she reached, she stopped. "I was told you are the ambassador," the eldest said. Nodded, her throat too dry for words. "I thought you declined to visit," she finally managed to say. The eldest looked around at the blue sky, the green grass, the crowd of curious humans watching from behind security barriers. Sunlight played across her form, making the galaxies in her skin shimmer with new colors. "I did decline, as did every member of our species, unanimously. It was the first unanimous decision we had made in 3 billion years." She turned her ancient eyes back to. "But I have spent the past 6 months experiencing something I had not felt since before your son was born." "What was that?" asked. "Uncertainty." The eldest's voice carried wonder, as if she was tasting the word for the first time. "I found myself thinking about your species constantly. I kept asking myself questions. What would happen if I visited? What would I see? What would I feel?" She paused, and something that might have been a smile crossed her alien features. "I did not know the answers, and for the first time in 3 billion years, not knowing felt exciting instead of frightening." More ETH vessels appeared in the sky. One by one, they descended, landing in a perfect circle around the first ship. Dozens of the ancient beings emerged, each one unique, each one carrying the light of distant stars within their form. "We thought we had lost something forever," the eldest continued. "We thought we had evolved beyond wonder, beyond curiosity, beyond the joy of discovery. We accepted this as the natural end of all wisdom." She looked at the humans gathered around her, scientists and diplomats, journalists and ordinary people who had come to witness history. "But you reminded us that wisdom is not the end of wonder. It is the beginning. Your species lives in a state of constant uncertainty, and instead of fearing it, you embrace it. You turn it into art and science and love and adventure." The other ETH had gathered behind her now, forming a semicircle of ancient power and beauty. Their galaxy-filled forms seemed to pulse with new energy. "You have given us something we did not know we needed," the eldest said. "Something we had forgotten we lost so long ago that we did not remember losing it." She reached out, and for the first time in billions of years, a ETH touched a human being. Her fingers brushed hand gently, and the ambassador felt warmth spreading through her, the warmth of stars being born. "You have reminded us what it was to be young, to wonder, to not know what comes next and to look forward to finding out." Felt tears running down her cheeks. Around her, she could hear other humans crying too. And something more, she could hear the ETH making sounds that her translator could not quite capture. It took her a moment to realize what they were. The ETH were laughing, with joy, with wonder, with hope. The eldest looked up at the blue earth sky, so different from the red light of her dying. "The Millennial Summit will proceed," she announced. "We will attend. We will participate. We will learn from your species and share what we know in return." She turned back too, and her voice grew softer. "And perhaps, after 4 billion years of watching the universe, we will finally learn how to live in it again." Across the galaxy, other ETH who had watched the transmission began to reconsider their decisions. For the first time in eons, they found themselves making choices based not on certainty but on hope, not on predictions but on possibilities, not on what they knew but on what they wanted to discover. Humanity had done what no species in 4 billion years had managed. They had not conquered the immortals or defeated them in war. They had not proven themselves stronger or smarter or more advanced. They had simply been themselves, creative, unpredictable, hopeful, alive. And in being themselves, they had taught the oldest beings in the universe how to feel alive again. As the sun set over Geneva, casting long shadows across the field full of ancient beings and young humans, finally understood why her species was special. It was not their technology or their achievements. It was not their strength or their intelligence. It was their gift for making the impossible feel possible, their talent for reminding others that the universe was full of wonders waiting to be discovered, their stubborn, beautiful refusal to accept that anything was ever truly finished. The Eth had seen everything in 4 billion years of watching the stars. But they had never seen anything quite like humanity. And that, the eldest realized as she watched the sun paint the sky in colors she had forgotten how to appreciate, was the greatest gift the universe could offer. The gift of something new.